We are at the Warsaw Security Forum, and I'm pleased to announce my next guest, which is Prime Minister of Kosovo, Albin Kurti. Sir, thank you for joining us here on TVP World, and welcome to Warsaw.
Thank you for having me.
Now, when we talk about Kosovo, of course, we've all heard that Kosovo aspires to become a European Union member. Kosovo is recognized by 100 countries throughout the world, but 5 EU member states, that is Spain, Greece, Romania, Slovakia, and Cyprus, still do not officially recognize Kosovo. What is the big issue here, and is this going to be fundamental to Kosovo's road to joining the European Union?
To be precise, 117 countries do recognize Republic of Kosovo.
Okay, thank you.
And that means that we have 5 non-recognizers within EU 27, and we have 4 non-recognizers within NATO 33. We hope that this minority of countries will join the majority, and in this way make international recognition of Kosovo even more solid. And definitely we need it in order to become members of both EU and NATO sooner rather than later. However, we do have Stabilization Association Agreement with European Union in spite of non-recognizers, and we got visa liberalization this year, including recognition by Spain of passport of Republic of Kosovo. Definitely there are some small steps being taken forward towards EU and NATO. However, I believe that the time is more ripe than ever, so we get recognition from these non-recognizers, and in this way we have a straightforward street towards EU and NATO accession, which we seek not only to benefit but also to contribute.
If you had to guess, would you say NATO first, European Union first?
I can imagine that we will belong to a group of countries like Poland, who first joined NATO and then EU. We have already surpassed 2% of GDP as investment and expenditure for our military and for our defense. Therefore, taking into consideration the criteria which are needed, I believe that first we will join NATO.
Now, how does Kosovo's unresolved conflicts with Serbia affect its EU accession?
It does affect because countries who do not recognize us use this as an argument for not changing their stance. Even though it is my impression that the reason why we're not being recognized by the EU5 are some analogies with their internal situation which are not accurate. However, the dispute that we have with Serbia, the lack of normalization of relations, plays a role because it strengthens certain skepticism or certain old stance, so to speak. On the other hand, as we know, whenever you have some turmoil or tension, it becomes world news. Whereas when you have something good to show, it evaporates in a day or two. Therefore, people do not remember, majority of people do not remember, that in February last year, we made an agreement with Serbia, which is basic agreement for normalization of relations, which is modeled upon 2 Germanys from 1972, when then German Chancellor Willy Brandt, in the spirit of his Ostpolitik, made this deal between 2 Germanys, live and let live, de facto mutual recognition. Also with Serbia, we have the same. And then we have added an implementation annex in March last year. The problem is that Serbia kept violating this agreement, and we are very far from implementing it. So while we speak time and again about dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia, we tend to forget that there has been a great achievement by Brussels, namely bringing about a very important text with 6 sentences in the preamble, 11 articles, and 12 points in the implementation annex, which say that Kosovo and Serbia should have good neighborly relations according to European standards of mutual recognition.
And what would you say are the biggest challenges in that relationship with Serbia?
The main challenge is the fact that Belgrade never emancipated itself from Milosevic, from the crimes committed by Milosevic. They consider that Milosevic made mistakes rather than crimes. On the other hand, they refuse to emancipate themselves from Putin. So Serbia is the only country in Europe, together with Belarus, that did not join EU and US sanctions against the Russian Federation. So no introspection for what they have done a quarter of a century ago, and no distanciation from Kremlin, I believe, are the key ingredients of this ever-continuing tension between Kosovo and Serbia.
Is Russia a factor in keeping Kosovo out of the European Union? Is that what the Kremlin would like?
Serbia says that they need Russia in Security Council to use veto against Kosovo. So this is how they justify their relation with Russian Federation. I believe the opposite is true. They are very aggressive towards Kosovo, so they will be liked by Russian Federation. By doing different kind of terrorist incursions in our territory, like 1 year ago, by erecting barricades through its parallel structures, like 2 years ago. In a way, they kept their fidelity towards Kremlin. And this really has to end. And hopefully, European Commission, in second term of Madam President Ursula von der Leyen, Serbia will be forced to choose either with a despotic Russian Federation, President Putin, or with European Union, which means democracy, political pluralism, rule of law, and human rights.
What are obviously to join the European Union, certain political and economic reforms are required. For Kosovo to join the EU, what exactly needs to be done on that front?
We need to do reform of our judiciary, and we also need to keep having our economy growing. If you see the GDP of Kosovo nowadays is 6 times bigger than in the year 2000, 1 year after liberation, and is 3 times bigger than in 2008 when we declared independence. And 2024, in comparison with 2021, when we took office as a government, we increased GDP together with the people, private sector, and publicly owned enterprises by 33%. So there was a great contribution of every sector of society in having this boost in economic growth. Coupled with this is democratic progress. According to Freedom House, regarding political rights and civil liberties, according to World Justice Project regarding improvement in rule of law, according to Reporters Without Borders for press freedom, according to Transparency International regarding fight against corruption, Kosovo became champion of the Balkans. And this is another good news, which is not known much. Therefore, we are, even though not a big country, 1.6 million inhabitants, and with a bit less than 11,000 square kilometers territory, we are a great example, number one, of humanitarian military intervention of NATO stopping Serbia's genocide, and number two, success story of development and democracy going hand in hand. Therefore, I believe that we are in the right trajectory, but we will need to keep our economy growing throughout this decade, have average salary in private sector increased by at least 50%, and reform of the judiciary in order to reach the gates of accession in Brussels.
Now, how does your government view the war in Ukraine? I think you can see some certain parallels with Russian aggression. Plainly put, how do you see the Russia's aggression against Ukraine and the war there?
Well, in my view, there are two Putins. First Putin was nostalgic about Soviet Union. But the later Putin, in contrast to the early Putin, is nostalgic about Russian Empire. We remember very well how Putin was considering that the fall of Soviet Union is the greatest catastrophe of 20th century. He was nostalgic about Sovietic times. But later on, I think he became more into this dark thinking about times even prior to Peter the Great. However, situation deteriorated because this nostalgia was combined with bitterness towards the United States of America and towards West. Russia traditionally, as you know better than me, was anti-Western. But now Russia is anti-European as well. And we don't have any other continent. We have to defend this continent. And Ukraine is doing this. Ukraine is defending the continent of Europe. When we were in elementary school, we learned that in geography, Europe extends till Ural mountain rings. But now we see that actually Europe ends in the front lines of Ukraine with Russian aggressive army. Military aggression, this invasion of Russia, for me, is an expression of this late Putin, nostalgic about medieval times and his bitterness towards the West. However, I would think that with an additional element, and that is something that we should clearly call Russian fascism. You know, our grandparents were suffering from German and Italian fascism. But fascism is not reserved for Germany and Italy. It is a plague that can fall upon every state and people. Our generation is living in the time of Russian fascism. And we should fight with democracy, with sovereignty. We should fight with solidarity of all European nations and states. To that end, Kosovo has made a decision to receive up to 5,000 refugees from Ukraine. We have trained against Russian army in military combat, tactic combat, together with Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, of Great Britain, Interflex program, 34,000 Ukrainian soldiers, and hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers in demining. We have donated dozens of vehicles, military vehicles, and tens of thousands of mortar shells. So Kosovo considers that we should help Ukraine because this is our humanitarian duty, but at the same time our political obligation towards a country that is fighting in its territory for the entire continent. The other aspect of this liberation struggle of Ukraine is the anti-colonial one. We have heard how American Association of Sociologists pointed out that in Donbass and in Crimea, Russian forces are changing the name of the streets and also the monuments, so changing the nomos of the land, which is typical colonial. So this liberation struggle has also this anti-colonial aspect that makes our duty even greater.
Prime Minister Albin Kurti, Prime Minister of Kosovo, thank you very much for this conversation. I very much enjoyed it, and thank you for joining us here on TVP World.
Thank you.
And that concludes this edition of Talks here from the Warsaw Security Forum. Thank you for joining us, and stay with us for more.